At Thanksgiving dinner, my sister pushed back her chair, lifted her glass, and smiled like she was on a stage. She said our parents were signing the house over to her. I would receive nothing. Laughter burst out. Applause. Someone shouted, "Finally!" I didn't join in. I didn't flinch. I held a small, calm smile. The kind you wear when thunder rolls, but you already checked where the cracks are. I placed my fork down and looked at my father. "Do you want to explain?" I asked quietly. "Or should I?" His color vanished. My sister stopped breathing. The table went still, heavy, waiting. Before I tell you what followed that silence, tell me, where are you listening from tonight, right now? It helps to know there are people listening who understand what it's like to grow up inside a family that looks whole but isn't. My name is Claire Morgan, and before that Thanksgiving, most people would have described my family as close. The kind of family that smiles easily in photos. Holiday cards with matching colors, arms linked, faces relaxed, as if harmony were effortless. We didn't argue loudly. We didn't air problems in front of others. In families like mine, things don't fall apart with shouting. They fracture quietly, through patterns no one names and roles no one questions. From an early age, I learned where I fit. I was the reliable one, the one who didn't make waves, the one people remembered only when something needed to be handled. I learned how to listen more than I spoke, how to read the room, how to take up less space. My younger sister, Lauren, never had to learn those skills. Attention found her naturally. She was expressive, confident, the kind of presence that filled rooms without effort. Relatives leaned toward her at gatherings. Compliments followed her like a habit. My parents didn't hide their pride. They built it around her openly. I never blamed her for it. I adjusted instead. Somewhere along the way, I understood that nothing would be offered to me freely. If I wanted independence, stability, or a future that felt like my own, I would have to create it without help. While schedules and money stretched to support Lauren's activities and interests, I was told to be patient, to wait, to understand. Eventually, I stopped asking. Silence became easier than disappointment. When I moved away for work, my parents called it unnecessary. They said I was choosing distance over family, as if wanting more for myself meant rejection. Lauren stayed close. She visited often, showed up when expected, settled comfortably into the life they'd imagined for her. She became reassurance. I became absence, even when I was standing right in front of them. I still came home for holidays, mostly because of my grandmother. Margaret was the only person who looked at me without calculation. With her, I didn't feel like a responsibility or a backup plan. I felt seen. When she hugged me, it lingered. When she spoke, it carried meaning. She'd say things quietly, things no one else ever did, reminders that strength doesn't always look loud. Then she'd return to her chair, as if she hadn't just given me something to hold on to. That Thanksgiving felt wrong before anyone said a word. The house felt tense, like a breath held too long. Conversations stalled when I entered rooms. My mother smiled too carefully. My father avoided eye contact. Lauren kept adjusting her clothes, glancing around like she was waiting for a cue. And when I finally sat at the table, I noticed something small that no one mentioned. The chair beside mine was gone. Not moved, removed. In my family, warnings were never obvious. They arrived quietly long before everything broke. I took my seat anyway, folding my napkin carefully, acting as if I didn't notice how conversations softened every time I stepped into the room. Voices dipped, laughter stalled, then restarted once I passed, thinner than before. Lauren moved through the space like everything belonged to her, straightening place cards, adjusting the centerpiece, murmuring small instructions to my mother that made them share quick smiles. Occasionally, she glanced at me with a polite expression that didn't reach her eyes, the kind you give someone you tolerate but don't quite welcome. It hadn't always been this way. Once we were just sisters, sharing secrets late at night, borrowing clothes without asking, promising we'd never turn into strangers. Somewhere between growing up and settling down, the roles shifted. She stepped into the place prepared for her. I faded quietly out of view. The problem with the house began months before Thanksgiving, long before anyone lifted a glass. It was early summer when my mother called and asked me to come home. She said it was important, but gave no explanation. When I arrived, they guided me straight to the dining table. Papers were already laid out. My father sat stiffly, hands folded, like he was waiting to deliver news he'd practiced. My mother smiled too deliberately. He explained they were adjusting the mortgage, something routine, something beneficial. He said all they needed was my signature. Even then, something tightened in my chest. My parents never asked for help unless there was more beneath the request. I scanned the documents slowly. The numbers blurred together, but the unease stayed sharp. Sections were missing, pages were blacked out. Explanations came too quickly, as if speed might replace clarity. I asked if I could take the papers with me. I said my attorney should review them. The room went still. My mother's smile slipped. My father closed the folder too fast, insisting it was unnecessary, insisting I was complicating things. I took the folder anyway. Back in the city, my lawyer didn't waste time. She called the next morning. She told me it wasn't a refinance, it was a transfer. Liability, not relief. If I signed, I would inherit their obligations. Debt I didn't know existed. A second loan. Missed payments. Warnings already sent. Something settled inside me as she spoke. Not anger, not yet. Just certainty. Weeks later, my father called again. This time he asked for money. He said it was urgent. He said it was for medical expenses. When I offered to pay directly, the story shifted. Truth leaked out in fragments. Deadlines, penalties, fear. Sitting at that Thanksgiving table later, watching Lauren glow beneath everyone's attention, I felt the weight of what I knew press against my ribs. They weren't giving her security. They were handing her a burden, and they expected me to stay silent while it happened. Dinner unfolded the way it always did, with small rituals pretending nothing underneath was shifting. Plates passed hand to hand. Someone commented on the turkey being dry. My mother laughed too loudly, correcting them. My father poured wine, careful not to meet my eyes. Lauren spoke easily, filling gaps, telling stories about work, about plans, about the house she and her husband were hoping to buy. Every word landed softly, rehearsed, like she already knew where she would end up and didn't need to worry about the steps in between. I listened, nodding when expected, counting the seconds between glances sent my way. At one point, my grandmother reached for my hand beneath the table. Her grip was firm despite the tremor in her fingers. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She squeezed once, then let go, as if reminding me that silence could also be a choice. When dessert was cleared, my father finally stood. He tapped his glass, smiling with that strained pride he saved for announcements meant to sound generous. He spoke about family, about unity, about how sacrifices were sometimes necessary to protect what mattered. Then he turned toward Lauren and placed a small envelope in front of her. The room watched her open it, watched her eyes widen, watched her mouth fall open in surprise that didn't look practiced at all. It was the house, not the deed itself, but the promise of it. Equity transferred, responsibility disguised as a gift. Applause followed, quick and warm. My mother wiped at her eyes. Lauren laughed, covering her mouth, overwhelmed. I felt the room tilt slightly, like gravity had shifted just enough to notice. No one looked at me. No one needed to. I understood what they were doing. This was the version they wanted remembered. This was the story they planned to tell. Lauren reached across the table toward me, asking if I was happy for her. Her smile was hopeful, unguarded. For a moment, I considered telling her everything right there. The loans, the risks, the documents they hadn't shown her yet. I could have broken the moment cleanly, loudly. But I didn't. I said yes. I said of course. I watched relief settle on her face and felt something colder take its place inside me. Later, as coats were gathered and goodbyes exchanged, my father pulled me aside. His voice dropped low. He thanked me for being understanding. He said it was better this way. He said Lauren didn't need the stress. He said I was strong enough to handle it. The words pressed into old grooves, familiar and sharp. I nodded because arguing would have meant admitting he was right about one thing. I was strong enough to walk away. I left early the next morning before anyone else woke up. On the drive back, my phone buzzed with messages I didn't open. I already knew what they would say. Gratitude wrapped in expectation. Silence mistaken for agreement. That night, I forwarded the files to my lawyer. I made my decision alone, the way I always had. If they thought quiet meant compliant, they were about to learn the difference. The lawyer didn't react the way people usually do when you tell them a family story. No raised eyebrows, no sympathy softened into politeness. He just listened, flipping through documents, asking precise questions. Dates, signatures, conversations that happened behind closed doors. When I finished, he leaned back and said something simple. The house wasn't a gift, it was collateral. My parents had refinanced twice, quietly, tying the property to business debts Lauren didn't know existed. The transfer they were celebrating wasn't protection, it was exposure. If anything went wrong, the liability would land squarely on her. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. Not relieved, clear. For the first time, the imbalance had a name, and names can be addressed. Over the next week, pieces fell into place. Bank statements, emails, a trust amendment filed without full disclosure. I didn't rush. I didn't confront anyone. I let them assume my silence meant acceptance. It always had before. Lauren called me on the 8th day. She sounded tired, excited, but strained. She asked if I could look over some paperwork for her. Dad said I was good with details. I told her I would. We met for coffee, just the two of us. She slid the folder across the table, apologizing for dragging me into it. I asked what she'd been told. She repeated the same story they'd given at Thanksgiving, word for word. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I opened the folder and showed her what was missing. The color drained from her face slowly, like a sunset you don't notice until it's almost gone. She reread the pages, then looked at me, confused. I told her the truth, carefully, without anger. I told her this wasn't about favoritism, it was about convenience. I told her they needed someone close, someone trusted, someone who wouldn't question the cost. She didn't cry, she sat very still, absorbing it. Then she asked why I hadn't said anything sooner. I answered honestly. No one had ever asked me to. That night, my parents called. Their voices overlapped, sharp and panicked. They accused me of betrayal, of jealousy, of poisoning my sister. I let them speak until there was nothing left but breath. Then I said I wasn't taking the fall for decisions I hadn't made. I said the lawyer would be in touch. The line went quiet, not explosive, not dramatic, just empty. Lauren moved out 2 weeks later. Temporarily, she said, space to think. My parents told relatives I'd manipulated her, that I'd always resented the family. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The paperwork spoke louder than I ever had. The refinancing unraveled. The trust was frozen. The house stayed where it was, unresolved, suspended between choices they'd tried to rush past. We don't gather the same way anymore. Holidays are smaller, conversations careful. Lauren and I talk more now, slowly, rebuilding something honest. My parents still don't look at me the same. That's fine. I don't need approval to stand on solid ground. Some families mistake silence for loyalty. They forget silence is also how people prepare. And when I finally spoke, it wasn't to destroy anything. It was to stop carrying what was never mine. Time didn't fix anything. It clarified it. Weeks passed, then months, and the noise settled into something more revealing. My parents stopped calling altogether, as if distance could undo paperwork. They spoke through relatives instead. Messages passed like warnings. I was told I'd embarrassed them, that I'd gone too far, that family matters should stay inside the family. I didn't argue. I'd learned that silence unsettles people more than explanations ever do. Lauren and I met often, usually without plans. Long walks, quiet meals, conversations that circled the same memories from different angles. She admitted how much pressure she'd felt staying close, how approval had always felt conditional, earned through availability. She said the house announcement hadn't felt like a reward so much as a responsibility she didn't remember agreeing to. Hearing her say it out loud shifted something between us. The story we'd been given our whole lives finally cracked. One afternoon, she brought up our grandmother. Evelyn had known. Not everything, but enough. The way she'd insisted on keeping certain documents separate, the way she'd pushed me to save, to invest, to never sign anything without reading it twice. Strength, she'd said, isn't loud, it's prepared. I understood now that her quiet pride hadn't been accidental, it had been protective. The legal process moved slowly, deliberately. My lawyer handled most of it. I only stepped in when necessary, when signatures were required, when statements had to be made official. Each step removed another layer of illusion. Debts surfaced, accounts closed, plans dissolved. My parents' anger softened into something else. Fear, maybe, or grief for a future they'd already spent in their minds. They asked me once if I'd reconsider, if I'd help smooth things over. I told them I wasn't the one who made it rough. The house never transferred. It never could have. In the end, it was sold, quietly, without announcements or applause. The proceeds went where they had to. No one celebrated, no one clapped. The story ended not with a confrontation, but with paperwork filed and doors closed. I moved forward, not dramatically, just steadily. Work expanded, opportunities came from places I hadn't expected because I'd finally stopped waiting for permission. Lauren did the same. She found her own place, started over without the weight she'd been handed. We don't talk about the house anymore. We don't need to. My parents still send holiday cards, smiling photos, neutral messages. I keep them in a drawer I don't open often. There's no bitterness there, just distance that feels earned. I don't attend every gathering. I don't explain why. I show up where I'm wanted, where I'm not required to shrink. People sometimes ask if I regret speaking up, if it was worth losing what I lost. I think about that Thanksgiving table, the cheers, the certainty on everyone's faces. I think about how easy it would have been to keep smiling and let the storm pass overhead. But storms don't pass when you're standing on someone else's foundation. I didn't take anything from my family. I took myself out of a story that needed someone silent to survive. And if that silence breaking changed everything, then maybe it was never as stable as it looked.
"Why is she here?" Dad asked, his voice barely holding together. The woman didn't soften. She didn't raise her voice either. "We received multiple alerts tied to this property," she said evenly. "I just need clarity." No one spoke. Not a single fork moved. The celebration that had filled the room minutes earlier was gone, replaced by something colder. Accountability. Mom turned to me, tears spilling fast now. "Please," she said, "say something. Fix this." I didn't, because for the first time, nothing needed fixing. It needed facing. The questions came slowly. Dates, missed payments, notices that had been ignored, a loan that had never been disclosed. Every pause from my parents made the truth louder. People started stepping back, not dramatically, just instinctively. When a structure starts collapsing, you don't stand under it. Jenna stared straight ahead, her shoulders shaking, not angry anymore, just stunned, like someone waking up and realizing the dream they were living in had been built on someone else's silence. My grandmother moved beside her, steady as ever, hand resting on her back like an anchor. When the investigator finally gathered the documents and left, the house felt hollow, smaller, like the walls had absorbed everything that had been said. Dad blamed me. Mom begged. Neither mattered. I picked up my bag. Jenna whispered my name. "Don't disappear." "I'm not. I'm just done disappearing for them." After that night, nothing stayed the same. The house didn't stay in the family. The stories stopped working. My parents downsized their lives the way they should have years ago, quietly, honestly. Jenna started rebuilding herself instead of the image she'd been handed. We talked more than we ever had, sometimes about the past, sometimes about nothing at all. And me? I learned that telling the truth doesn't destroy families. Pretending doesn't save them either. If you've ever been the one expected to stay quiet to keep everyone else comfortable, I want to know, where are you listening from tonight? And when silence was no longer an option, what would you have done?